Hi everyone, this is tutorial 2 for Justice Ends and Means. Again, I'm by myself, so I'll just raise a few comments about the workshop and let you go at it in your own time. So this module is really getting us started on the idea of justice as a system. So, and to really start differentiating the idea of justice as an ideal or justice as a personal thing, and justice as something which is encoded in a set of governmental organizational systems. So obviously the legal system's a very big part of it. It's, the justice specialist in the system, but there are a lot of other structures and ideas and things that are embedded in our society that are systemic aspects of justice. And they're things that we often take for granted until such time as they break down. And then sometimes it becomes very alarming very quickly when we realize that our personal idea of what justice is and the way justice actually operates as a system can be quite different. All right, so the workshops for this week. As usual, there are two parts to the workshops. The first parts are specifically focusing on the thematic parts of this course about issues of justice and how we understand justice. Part B is focused on getting you used to uni, getting the skills you need to study, and understanding, a different type of system, the educational system. And each week we'll be looking at those two perspectives because this is one of the foundation units. It's the foundation unit in the criminology program that is designed to not only teach you about a subject area, but also give you study skills as well. All right, so the first exercise is looking at human rights documents and developing for yourself a list of what you consider to be the most important rights. So obviously, I mean, there are lots of different rights out there. There are things that are encoded in official documents like constitutions. Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights like the United States has. We only have a few rights in our constitution, but we have rights anytime legislation is passed. There are some form of rights that are recognised for some individuals or organisations in those documents. But the one document that we tend to go to is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was one that pretty much everyone in the world agreed on after World War II. So even China and Russia, who had significant reservations about some of the property rights in the Universal Declaration, basically agreed to say, okay, we'll agree to this because of the things that happened in World War II. And we think it's more important that we have this international recognition, this international consensus. So Australia is a signatory. These rights are not things that you can formally assert under Australian law, but they're a good starting point for understanding what rights are out there. So this exercise is about having a read through that document and forming your own shortlist about, which 12 do you think are the most important? Not top 10 or top 12. Top 12 that you think are the most important rights and rank them. And I think that's a good exercise to get you thinking about, well, first of all, to get you to understand the document and to know the rights that are out there, but also to start thinking in terms of that idea of rights, because we're going to come back to that throughout the term, this idea of justice not necessarily being an individual intuitive thing where you see a situation and you say, I think that's wrong, therefore that's unjust, but where you can refer to a set of standards where you can say, I think that's unjust because that violates this right. So it's a different way of thinking, and it's a way that's very much encoded in the Western legal system and our legal thought, this idea of rights. So that's the first exercise. To start is to think about that, familiarize yourself with the rights, and create your own shortlist that's ranked. One thing I would suggest is don't ignore the boring rights or the ones that look boring, because things like the right to life, which I mean, they're all very important. The right to life looks really kind of dramatic. But there's also things like due process and fair process rights that you go, oh, that sounds a bit kind of boring and procedural. However, some of those rights are there because all the other rights depend on them. If you don't have a right to fair process, then it doesn't really matter what the other rights are because you're never going to get access to them. So that's one thing I'd think about when you're looking at those lists of rights, is considering the ones that look boring at first, that there actually might be some more to them. All right, part B is basically just to introduce you to some of the basic theories and understandings around learning. And these are all mentioned in the workshop itself. And then to develop for yourself a short plan of your study, and how you're going to organize your study for this term. So it's not necessarily about your timetable, we'll come back to that later, but how are you going to keep track of your obligations from, week to week? Are you going to just wing it and hope someone tells you when something's due in? Probably not such a great idea. Are you going to use project management software on your computer? Or are you going to keep a good old-fashioned notebook? Or are you going to keep a series of notebooks for each of your subjects? So it's the aim here is to start thinking about the way in which you study and what your own particular needs from study are, and also to think about some of the stuff that's mentioned in part B, which I've called the meta of learning, and that's to sort of the theories around the theories of learning. And a lot of the philosophy that these units have been designed on have been based on this. One thing I would add that isn't in there, active learning is very, very important. Emphasize that all the way through, and all the research we've been done has said that being actively doing something is heaps better for learning than just sort of passively trying to absorb it. So even down to when you're reading your readings, if you take notes as you read, you're going to learn a lot more than if you just sit there and read. And you might think that, I'll highlight as I go, and that'll be active. But the problem is, and I think a lot of us hit the point where very soon, you're very, good at highlighting on the first couple of pages, and then soon you realize that you're not really sure which bits are important or not, and you end up sort of highlighting everything in a document. It's a common trap. It's a trap that a lot of people fall into. So note taking, I think highlighting has its place, but I think to really get benefit out of reading, you need to actually sit down, handwrite, type, or whatever, some active notes on what you're doing. And that can also come in very handy later on if you need to find something specific for an assignment, because you then have your notes and you don't have to go and reread the article. You can go, oh, Smith's article on page 17 had a really good point on this, and I can refer to that. Okay, there was one other point I wanted to make in there is the issue of PowerPoint. And PowerPoint is one of these strange things that's a technology that sort of emerged as a way of replacing whiteboards and lecture notes. But it soon became a bit of a plague in education. And this is not my opinion, this is backed up by research, in that people who don't take notes, this is like the notes in the reading, if you don't take notes in lectures, whether they be face-to-face lectures or little video mini lectures, whatever, if you don't actually take notes, you don't learn anything. And someone sending you the PowerPoint slides, you don't learn anything from that either. Just saving the PowerPoints on your hard drive is not an active form of learning. But we increasingly see students saying, I need to have the PowerPoints, give me the PowerPoints. And this is a paternalistic attitude for myself to take, I know, but sometimes you need people who know better to make decisions for your own good. Those PowerPoints aren't going to do you any good, and worse, they're going to give you a false sense of security, because you're going to say, oh, I know that subject because I've got all the PowerPoints for it, and I can always look at them later when I need them. Pro tip, no one ever looks at the PowerPoints later. No one ever does later the things they say they do because they hit the end of term and suddenly everything's due at the same time. There are personal issues that always pop up at the worst possible time. So if you ever find yourself saying to yourself, I'll do that later, tell yourself immediately that that's not true. If you're not going to do it now, it's very unlikely that you're going to go back and do it later. If you do, that's a bonus, but don't delude yourself into thinking that you're doing better than you actually are because you've got, good intentions to follow up later. And PowerPoints fall into that category all the time. So often students feel as though they've accomplished something because they're collecting the PowerPoints like you're collecting your Pokemon. Oh, look, I've got all the PowerPoints for this subject. I'm doing really, really well. But it means nothing in terms of learning, and in fact can create you a false sense of confidence that can really undermine you. So this is not a common opinion. A lot of lecturers just say, oh, we'll just give students the PowerPoints and be done with it. They're probably not familiar with all the research that's been done. The research that's been done on learning has condemned PowerPoints as a really, really bad thing for students. And yes, it's paternalistic to say, I'm making this decision for you. I'm not handing you a stack of PowerPoints and letting you, when people say, I want PowerPoints, saying, oh, well, here you go, there's some PowerPoints. But I'm doing it for your own good, If you went to the doctor and said, I want to eat nothing but chocolate, and the doctor said you shouldn't eat nothing but chocolate, you're probably not going to give that doctor a bad review and say, well, it's a bad doctor because he didn't let me eat all the chocolate I wanted to eat. Hopefully you'll be listening to the doctor and saying, oh, okay, it's going to be bad for me if I eat nothing but chocolate. Same situation here. So I probably, next time I run this, I might put some more in the notes on PowerPoints in that regard. But I think in this day and age, we are educated to expect PowerPoints and to see PowerPoints as some kind of quality in learning. I paid my fees, I get the PowerPoints that I never look at, and that's therefore I've learned something. But you need, I guess, a bit of context from old folks like me who learnt before PowerPoint was a thing to understand how actually taking notes, actually revising your notes, thinking about it, going over. Yeah, sure, it's time consuming, but learning is time consuming. Anyway, that's the bit of the message for this week. The part B of all the workshops have got that kind of material in terms of giving you advice, getting you started in learning at a tertiary level, helping you understand some strategies to improve your learning. And we'll talk about those again next week. We'll be looking at a different topic area related to justice and a different topic area relating to learning.